I'm Bob Crawford.
And I'm Ben Sawyer.
And this is the road to now.
What a nice road it is today, Bob.
It is a glorious road. It's a road that took over a decade to get here. Because while you and I were starting a fledgling Joe Schmo podcast about history and about what was going on in this country in 2016, there were a team of people up in New Hampshire working on perhaps the greatest of all the great history documentaries.
Yes, it is. And a documentary that I have been excited for since I heard about it. Getting to watch these on the screeners was like if you were a child in November and Christmas came the next day out of nowhere. And it definitely paid off. So let's introduce our guests. Bob, do the honors.
Our guests today are directors of the new Ken Burns documentary, The American Revolution, Sarah Botstein and David Schmidt.
Hi. Good to be here.
David, you've been with us before.
I have.
We talked about Ben Franklin. Sarah, welcome. We're excited to have you today. Where to begin with this? It took 10 years to create. Talk about when this idea that is so obvious, but Ken had done the Civil War and Vietnam and World War II and country music and baseball and jazz. When did the idea of the American Revolution as a whole kind of hit the table for you guys?
I'll channel Ken for a moment. So after the Civil War came out, Ken vowed that he would never do another war film. He was like, okay, I've done it. I've gotten the big, important, major war. It's done incredibly well. I'm not going to do war again. And then after we had completed the jazz series, he always talks about the fact that we were doing an education event and learned that more American high schoolers thought that we fought with the Germans against the Russians in the Second World War, and decided, you know what, we're going to do World War II. And when we were finishing World War II, he sort of looked at us and went, you know what, we're going to do Vietnam. So we did Vietnam. And that project also took a decade. And in 2015, I think we were all in the editing room. We were finishing a scene on the Ai Drang Valley, which is in episode 3. And there's a beautiful map, which is a kind of Google Earth, Ken Burns, Florentine Films map. And he turned to us and said, I'm ready to do the American Revolution. And I think for a long time, for all of us, the American Revolution is pre-photograph, pre the traditional archival materials that certainly I'm used to working with. David and Ken have, done Ben Franklin. Ken had done Thomas Jefferson and Lewis and Clark. But to do a big war before photographs is a big gulp to take. And so initially, I personally wasn't actually attached to the project, but he and David were doing Franklin and asked if I would join. And I gulped myself, since I am, most of the films I've worked on have been in the 20th century, Prohibition a little bit in the 19th. And it's been an incredible project to work on, both artistically and historically, kind of academically. It's really been an incredible marriage of a film that is history and art, and how those two things interact, and how to take the opportunity that presented itself by not having the traditional archival materials to work with. And I think it's been really exciting for David, for me, for Ken, for Jeff Ward, for all of our team. And we're excited to share it with everyone.
Anytime we start in on a project, it's really exciting because we don't know that much about the subject. Right. We think we know something about the American Revolution, but really we did not. And so when we decide to go into doing this project, it's energizing, because you're going to get to spend years really getting to know a subject. And in this case, this subject is so world important that, we feel really lucky. But also, we've noticed that a lot of other people, as we've been touring the country promoting the film, share that hunger for that curiosity for what they think they ought to know about the founding of this country. And it's really great that we're going to have this opportunity to share our process of discovery with them if they come and watch our movie.
This is such a huge story.
Mm-hmm.
You cover it in about 6 episodes, a total of about 12 hours, and it's incredible how much you're able to tell. But I wonder, you come to this incredible event, so much has been written on it. It's so fixed in our memory. It matters so much to so many people for different reasons. Mm-hmm. Where do you start? What's the first thing you did when you said we're going to do this documentary?
Well, we all start reading and we all start learning, and we try to be as curious and open minded as humanly possible. And we try to figure out who's alive that's spent their careers studying the subject and how have they interpreted different aspects of it similarly and differently. I think we often say we love to put a big Thanksgiving table together of, people who don't normally eat together and have everybody talk to each other, and we get to learn. It's like a big classroom. But it's also, I think you hit on the American Revolution. When you really peel back the layers, we all think we know something about it, and we do, but we know the teeniest, tiniest bit. And then part of what we know is not actually, it's really mythology. So we're missing so many of the pieces of the story that make it really exciting and also make it really relevant to where we are today. And I keep saying, Ken talks about this a lot, and we have a neon sign that he had put in our editing room a long, long time ago that says it's complicated, and it lights up, and everybody gets to remember that it's complicated. But I've been saying it's also really surprising. So yes, it's complicated, but it's surprising. And I hope the film gives the viewer the kind of excitement that we had making it, which is like, wow, this is really surprising. And parts of what are surprising are the really complicated, bloody, difficult 18th century war that was fought for nearly a decade, but also the exciting experiment on how a government could work. And the people alive then didn't know how it was going to turn out. And so we're hoping our viewers don't know how it's going to turn out as they go.
I think when I studied the American Revolution in school, it was, in a survey U.S. history course, and the teachers were concerned we weren't going to get to the 20th century if we spent too much time on the revolution. So we went by it pretty quickly. I don't think that they told us information that was incorrect by any means. I think what you might already come into this film knowing about the revolution, we're not going to challenge that necessarily. Maybe some things, but most things are, Yorktown, it's important, it mattered, it happened, the Declaration, all of that. What we're going to be giving you, if you watch the film, is just a lot more context that will make all those things make much more sense. So if you understand the context of the people sacrificing themselves, their families, their futures, their property, if you understand that, then those documents that founded our country matter on a different level. The Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, the Bill of Rights, they matter when you understand the context.
At one point throughout the 12 hours of the series, I wrote the American Revolution as World War. Mm-hmm. At another point, I wrote the American Revolution as class struggle. Mm-hmm. And then at another point, I wrote the American Revolution as Civil War.
100%.
Pick one of those.
I mean, we should unpack all three because I think all three are really, really important. I guess we'll work backwards, David. I'll start with the Civil War.
Sure.
The American Revolution was actually a civil war, technically, right? We're breaking with the mother country. We're British subjects breaking from the British government. That's a civil war. And you could say that the American Revolution was a civil war and our Civil War was our revolution. There's something to that, right?
Yep.
But it's a civil war technically in terms of what the war is, but it's also a civil war in families, in neighborhoods, in communities, north to south. So the Haudenosaunee split, brother fights against brother, neighbor fights against neighbor, community fights against community. And it's devastating. Henry Knox, one of the great military stories of the war that every little boy learns in grade school, when he has to get his cannons from Fort Ticonderoga to Boston in the heart of winter, which is like actually insane. And he does it. Okay, that's cool. And every boy, and that's a really amazing military feat. His wife, pregnant at the time, right, David? Mm-hmm. So now I'm really interested. Okay, he has a wife. So I'm listening. She's pregnant. I'm double listening. Her family are loyal to the crown. She loses her family. So it just makes it real.
They were in Boston. The Cannons, the family, the Loyalist family, the Cannons that came from Ticonderoga were what forced the British to leave Boston, and the Loyalist family left with the British. So she said at one point during the war that she had lost her mother, father, brother, and sisters. She didn't see them again. I don't think they ever saw the daughter that was born from that pregnancy.
That's a civil
That's
war.
a civil war. And then on a global stage, the revolution is in some ways the third or fourth global conflict for the prize of North America. Previous ones, we cover a little bit about the French and Indian or 7 Years' War between the French and the British in the lead up to the American Revolution. But this is kind of in some ways a reprise of that. And it took, a few years of fighting for the American revolutionaries to prove that they could hang it. They could fight with the British for the French to come in, but they did. And later the Spanish declared war on the British too, as did the Netherlands. Meanwhile, in North America, there's all sorts of people making decisions whether or not to involve themselves in this war, stay neutral. That those could be, as Sarah was referring to earlier, American loyalists, but also there's Native nations who are contending with whether they want to be, stay out of it. Can they stay out of it? So I think we say in the introduction of the film that the American Revolution ended up involving more than 24 nations, European as well as North American. And, we don't normally think about that, but this absolutely was a global war. It was fought not just in the 13 colonies. And when it was in the 13 colonies, by the way, it was everywhere. It was in the cities. It was in the back country, obviously upstate on the Hudson River, but it was also in Canada. It was also over the Appalachians in what's now Kentucky, Ohio, even all the way to Illinois. It was on the Gulf Coast. It was in the Caribbean. It was in the waters off of England and France. It was on the African coast. It was even in India. And the Patriots could not have won the Battle of Yorktown, at the very least, without the French Navy and the French Army. And so the decisive victory of the American Revolution is as much, if not more, a victory of the French Army and the American Army together.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very important this is one of the myths that we want to punch a hole right through, which is that we did not win the American Revolution on our own. We won the American Revolution because of our French allies. But then the third piece of your question, which is class, which I think is another part of American history that we just constantly leave out. So the founders were the upper class, and the people fighting the war were mostly the lower class. And that is a part of our history we need to think about and try to understand. And we tend to think about race, religion, ethnicity, and we miss class. And we're missing an opportunity to really understand something important about American history when we do that.
I think one of the interesting things about the Patriot Coalition in this war is that it combined people you might think otherwise would not get along, might not get along today, might not have gotten along in 1765. But in 1775, they found a way to come together to win this war. And in order to do that, in order for the famous founders to get the average American on their side, they had to make certain promises of increasing liberty in the new United States. And so in some cases, that's religious freedom. In others, it's going to be eventually the right to vote. In others, it's in Rhode Island and Connecticut, if you're enslaved, you can win your freedom by serving in the Continental Army. What it does is, while the initial goals of the revolution, when it starts on Lexington Green, it has nothing to do with independence or union of the states or creating a new republic or a new nation. It's about, liberating Boston. It's about getting things back to the way they were, the way we liked it under the British Empire. But in order to win the revolution, it becomes something about, the noblest aspirations of humankind, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, right? All men are created equal. Those are things that come out of this, in part in order to win the war. And I think that that's just fascinating and not something that I had considered before working on this.
The international aspect of it, kind of the global aspect, I would say. What's fascinating to me is that all these different groups are in there, and the story that they're telling about what's actually happening at that moment overlaps. Who the other players are means something different to them. And I love the part, I think it's in episode 5 or 6, where you bring the Spanish into it, because we forget about this.
6, yeah.
And the Spanish get involved. And what's this about for the Spanish? On the surface of it, they should recognize what a problem this is going to be, because they're supporting a revolution whose spirit will absolutely undermine their authority, yet they do it. And so this overlapping series of stories really, I think, is fascinating, and how it does unhinge things, because the other side, the other countries that get in on our side, within a couple of years, the French monarchy has been overthrown. And by 1820, basically the Spanish are kicked out of South America. And it's just a fascinating story, and how all that origin comes from this war.
And Ben, the John Adams administration is in turmoil over the French
Yep.
because the half the country's turning on the French. The Federalists are turning on the French. So, Ben, I'm going to jump on your point about the Spanish because I made note of that. Bernardo de Galvez and Pensacola, right? Taking the Spanish or taking Pensacola. And that's the point where the British in Great Britain, where in the House of Commons and Parliament, they're kind of the political aspect, the domestic British political. It's not polling well anymore.
Yeah.
Like that's where the political pressure to get out kind of meets its critical mass.
Basically, as soon as the French get involved in 1778, the British have to really recalculate where they're allocating their troops. So they give up on Philadelphia, which they had spent all of 1777 taking, and they try to consolidate their troops in North America and New York. But they're never going to have another big offensive from New York in the northern states after that point. They'll send troops to the South because the South is more closely aligned with their colonies in the Caribbean, which they intend to hold on to and do hold on to. And hopefully they can hold on to Charleston and Savannah too, is their hope, right? But then when the Spanish get involved, they've not only got to protect New York, they're holding New York. They're holding Newport during part of this, but I think they're giving up at this point there as well. Their holds in the South, all their Caribbean possessions. They're in nominal control in Florida, East and West Florida, as it was called then, but basically the entire Gulf Coast to New Orleans, which was Spanish, and as well as all their other overseas possessions, Canada, elsewhere. So, yeah, I think that when Pensacola falls, that's in 1781, things are starting to really go bad. But let's be real, October 1781 is when Cornwallis surrenders his army in Virginia. That is a much bigger deal. And they're actually going to continue to fight the war against the French and Spanish and do pretty well after that point. But they are not going to continue the war in any meaningful way against the Americans after that point.
You get into, when I heard the Revolution, I wondered what it was going to cover, right? Because there's, what's the end point? My case in my classes is that, the French Revolution ends with Napoleon, that the Russian Revolution ends with Stalin, that, the Chinese Revolution ends with Mao, and that the American Revolution continues. And it ends when
as Benjamin Rush says at the end of the film. I mean, yes, we constantly talk about, we were at an event and somebody asked a question to Ken last week. Does the war end in 1781, 1783, 1787, 1801? Now, when does the war end? So it's a great question. And I think how we start the film and how we end the film, especially when we're doing a big war, those scenes take the longest to figure out. And they tend to cover the most ground chronologically. So you have to rewind enough to understand why the shots were fired on Lexington Green. And you got to throw the audience far enough ahead to really think about why it matters today. And that is really hard to do.
Well, that gets into a central question I had here, is that there's a difference between the war and the American Revolution.
100%.
Right? And this is, within the fields of American history, scholars who look at this, some of them refuse to call this the American Revolution. They call this the War for Independence.
100%.
And I wonder, was there a discussion about what to call this, and how you guys came upon calling it the Revolution as opposed to the War for Independence?
Because it is. So yes. We think and talk and wrestle with all those questions. The Brits call it the War for Independence. There's something technically accurate about it being the War for Independence. But the American Revolution, when you really step back, is both things. It's the American Revolution, this revolution of ideas, government, society. It's everything that we hold we hold these truths, right? This is really important stuff. That is a revolution. And the American Revolution is technically a really horrible, difficult, long, brutal 18th century war. And so the title actually, for me, speaks to both those things.
I think that you pointed it out before. The American Revolution meant different things to different people then. It certainly means different things to different people now. I think if you polled John Adams about what the American Revolution
Sure.
is, first of all, he would say something different every time you asked him. But at some point,
It's
he
good.
said that at some point he said it was before the first shots were fired.
Right.
So I don't think I completely agree with him, but we had to set goalposts on what we were going to cover with the film. And so what we wanted to do was to basically frame it around the war and do the tick-tock of the war from 1775 to 1783. But, you need to know why we got into this war and what this war produced. And we felt like roughly we can start with the French and Indian War, and roughly we can end with the Bill of Rights in the foundation of the federal government. So, there's a little bleed out where you learn a little bit more before that and a little bit more after that. But basically, yeah, that's where we were grounding ourselves.
You mentioned earlier the Haudenosaunee.
Mm.
And one of the great things that, like you said earlier, David, this doesn't change what we've learned in school because, Ben and I were often having guests and talking about subjects that people know nothing about. But this is a subject that everybody knows something about. And so, really, what you guys did was fill in a lot of the gray area or created, just highlighted how gray the area is in certain places. But the detailed narrative weave of the Native American story interweaved with the story of the Patriots and the Loyalists, that goes throughout the whole 12 hours. And you had Kathleen Duvall,
Yeah.
who we had on recently to talk about Native nations as one of the experts for that part of the story. Talk about that the Native American, how complicated their story is as it goes along the story of the Patriots and the Loyalists.
I'm going to start and then toss it to David, who's really a student of this subject, because I think personally for me, audiences have been interested to I did not understand the centrality of the Native American experience when it came to the American Revolution. And I'm embarrassed by that. I'm saddened by that. I can't believe how little I understood, not just about what happened to different Native nations, as David was talking about earlier, different in the North and in the Mid-Atlantic and the South. The Haudenosaunee and the Cherokee have different experiences. I didn't really understand about the importance of the proclamation line in 1763. I didn't understand that Native nations split apart in the ways that they did. I didn't fully understand and appreciate the Native nations that fought with the Patriot cause, the reasons they might have sided with the British. It all seems fairly obvious to me now that I know about it. But again, I hope it's one of the takeaways from the film that when you watch the 12 hours, you're reminded constantly of who had been on this continent before, the deep roots that they have, the examples that they presented around how democracies could work in certain instances, and the very understandable choices that those nations made during the war and putting those choices into context. And then David, who is a student of this, should take the ball. But I do hope it's one of the main things that viewers take away. Same with World War and Civil War.
Yeah, in addition to Kathleen Duvall, who you mentioned and who we love, and
Right.
she said kind things about us on your podcast, which we should return the favor because she is delightful.
She's a total delight.
Thanks for
Um,
listening.
she she's one of many people we consulted that know this history. Lots of Native people who both appeared on and off camera, and
Yeah,
including
we should just give a shout out to Michael Whitkin and
yeah.
Bill Deloria, Annette and Maggie Blackhawk, and
Mhm.
I mean, it's a good chorus on camera and off camera.
Exactly. And then my as much as I am a student of this, it's because I took several courses with Colin Calloway at Dartmouth College when I was there many, many years ago. And he would start the class by saying American history doesn't make any sense without American Indian history, which is true, but it's never truer than with this war. So I appreciate you saying that the Native American stories are interwoven between, but it's not our weaving it. That's just the reality, that people are thinking about. This revolution is about a lot of things, but one of those things is about the future of the continent. And so for somebody like White Eyes, who's a Delaware chief who thinks maybe his best bet is to side with the Patriots, he's thinking about his future, his people's future, in making that decision. For somebody like Joseph Brant, who chooses the other side, he's thinking just the same way. They've had some experience with these colonists, and they know that they're land hungry, and this might not. This might be their opportunity to side with the British and push back against this. So I think what's important to realize is that all sorts of people are making decisions, and they have their own foreign policies. The nations do at that level. And it's not so simple as the Patriots impose this on them or the British impose this on them. These are the decisions they're making as well. And we are thankful that people in the 18th century wrote down some of their thoughts, so we can give voice to them when we make the film.
David, how cool was it to connect with your former professor and work on this?
It was super cool, for sure. Yeah.
It must have been. It's just kind of, I don't know.
10 out of 10 cool.
You're left with these impressions from these people. You know, to this day, Lyman Johnson, who was my Latin American history teacher, told us on the last day to go travel the world, and if we didn't have money to sell our car and go. And I still tell my students that on the last day of class. It must have been fantastic.
It was super, and also he remembered me, which was surprising and awesome.
Yeah, I'll brag. I'll brag for David, since he can't really do that. But Colin Calloway is enormously proud, and was really that's a really nice sort of side story to have seen him over the years while making the film, because he did sit for the interview and then advise us, and has, I think he's very, very proud to have been one of David's teachers.
I can't imagine. That's gotta be awesome.
Yeah.
So over the years, let us into the process a little bit. I got two process questions. One is, there's three directors: Ken Burns, Sarah Botstein, and David Schmidt. Three. That's that's a lot of brain power. You talk about like debating, like, what do we call this, or what does this term mean? What does this mean? Like, take us in. Is it a matter of directing by committee, or is it you take this, and you take this, and we'll meet back up? How's it work?
All right. We'll both probably want to answer this, but the fourth voice, you can't have this conversation without adding Jeff Ward.
Yeah.
The writer.
Film starts with the word, right?
Yes.
We're like, know him, know me, right? That's what Duke Ellington said about Billy Strayhorn. So know him, know me. So Jeff. So it's the four of us, really, right? And we all make each other better. In the editing room, Ken has the last word, but we bring our fiercest and best ideas and our fiercest and best arguments. And we spend a lot of the 10 years trying to convince each other why we think X, Y, or Z should go X, Y, or Z way. And that is both true for the history that we're telling, the dry dates and facts, the people whose stories we're telling, and then what music we're listening to, what visuals we're looking at. When do we see a pamphlet? How do we move on that pamphlet? When do we go on camera? I mean, every single frame of those 12 hours has a story. And the 3/4 of us have debated and thought and really spent time on every one of those images, every one of those cuts, every one of those music cues, every single comma, every single word. And we don't do any of that without the extraordinary editors that we work with, who bring an entirely different art and discipline to this craft. And it's a tiny band of the four of us and a big band of 45 of us at our biggest. And we make films, like I was saying earlier, both to reflect accurate fact-based history, to tell great stories, and to hopefully be really great works of art. And we do it together. It's collaborative art. One of us cannot do this without the other.
I was watching a little bit of episode 2 again this morning, and there was a scene where I forget what the dialogue was behind it, but there's a wooden stake being driven into the ground.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm thinking to myself, having seen, now seen it a couple times, thinking, man, that stake is going into the ground, and you guys, that visual was chosen to reinforce what is being told through the script, through the
Hmm.
words.
Yep.
Yeah, and can I
Getting,
just add on
yeah.
to this because this was in my notes too, Bob? I have a I one of my my gluttonous activities is I really like great AV, and I have a great sound system in my house.
Okay.
And when the cannons went off,
Yeah.
Mm.
Right.
it was like it like shook kind of the house, and
Right.
it was incredible.
We do that on purpose. I mean, we spend the better part of 6 or 9 months in a film like this, putting in every single effect and then leveling it. So sometimes you want that cannon to shake your room and wake you up, and it's gonna, slam right into Rhiannon Giddens, right? So it's gonna slam into a music cue. So the sound and the music are constantly having to relate to each other. And then we're gonna get out of the way and be really, really quiet and really, really eerie. And
That's awesome.
it's not one thing. So we're constantly calibrating all of those elements. David, what did I miss?
Nothing. But Bob, you were talking about hitting the hitting the hammer on
See
the
the
head.
hammer, right?
Hitting the but there's other times where like some of the beautiful, beautiful footage that Buddy Squires shot um is, a sunset or something with the wind blowing, the lights flying through the trees. I don't know, but what it is just kind of visually arresting and allows you to listen to these sometimes incredibly complicated, either 18th century words or just difficult to understand information.
You intermix these incredible shots, these images from the day, paintings. But the one thing that I'm always stuck on is there's so many of them. Did you incorporate sources that you all produced, that someone produced of the moment, and how did you negotiate that?
Basically, sort of philosophically, the way we went about this, David, let me know if you don't think this is right, but basically you take a person, place, or thing, and you find out what exists from the documentary record. Is it a map, a lithograph, some kind of reporting, a letter, a log of some kind, any kind of actual thing from that time? And then you kind of go out like you drop a stone in water and you ripple out from there. So we decided to just bring in everything that has been produced from those people, place, or things for 250 years. And one of the things and then, edit them together in some seamless, beautiful way, hopefully. And if you don't have what 1% of the people living in the 18th century had their portraits painted. So you can't rely on portraiture, right? But where did they walk? What did they see? What did they look out at? Is there a gravestone? Is there a signature somewhere? Was there something written about where they lived or how they lived or something that's real? And then we worked closely with all the institutions that spend their time either as living history museums or as actual museums collecting and curating and organizing this material. So at the Museum of the American Revolution, they have a series of extremely beautiful watercolors. And we brought those in and they started really working. And so we commissioned 12 more of them, right, David? Is it 12?
12 is right, yeah.
Yeah. And I think the viewer pretty much knows that's not an archive from 250 years ago,
Right.
right? Like we're
And
signaling to yeah.
those artists are Greg Harlan with Ronceville Wood Harlan. They were tremendous, and they have done work for the Museum of American Revolution and other institutions, and we licensed that separate, but then commissioned 12 new things.
And then the whole other thing that we haven't talked about, which we will both want to think about, is that there's always one thing in a film like this that's just a bigger beast and more complicated and more work and the biggest line in our budget and completely out of control. And that was the maps.
They're awesome though.
They're
So
awesome, right? But they
let me
were
just
like,
say,
by the end, it was like there's a map meeting, and everyone was just like, no, don't make it so. But we did, there's the archival maps, which are really beautiful and really important from the archival record. They're not always accurate, and sometimes they're like the Battle of Lexington and Concord, where you have the little guy and the Minutemen and the cannon, and they're beautiful and they're complicated and they're political and they're of a you have to really look at them with a clear eye, but they're
No sea
beautiful and they're
serpents.
really important.
Yeah,
I'm going to say,
exactly.
we give one shout out right here. The imagery you use and the recreation during the failed siege of Quebec,
Hmm.
that was, I understood, and I've
Right.
read about that battle. I understood it in a way that I never did before when I
I
saw the
didn't
way they come
understand it until
around.
I saw that either.
Right. I didn't either. I was like, oh, Quebec, boring. And then I was like, wow, this is like the best
Exactly.
scene in the movie. I'm like, oh, Arnold, Montgomery, I don't care, whatever. Then you see that map, you're like, wow, I really care. Those are so that's the third map element. I was going to say we have the archival maps and the beautiful watercolor maps that we worked with a cartographer, and that the accuracy of those David should talk about. And then we did real CGI for the first time, and that's a company in London called 422, and they do it in Trenton, they do it at Quebec, they do it at Yorktown, they do it at the end of Long Island. And those maps, I think, are just
And
extraordinary.
they were still willing to work with us even after winning the American
Yeah.
War for Independence.
Yeah. The maps
Hey,
are a whole
the
thing.
war for moolah is,
Yeah.
is
No,
Brad,
actually,
did you pay him
everybody
in
wins.
continental dollars?
I'm sure they appreciated their paycheck, but I think they really, really enjoyed the
Yeah.
work. And I think a lot of the people we've worked with over the last, oh my gosh, 10 years, including the voice cast, these are just people that are interested, curious people, and they wanna work with us. It's really a joy that we get to do that.
A child born when you guys began this series is now in third or fourth grade. Pretty amazing. So, and somebody has gone from
Yeah.
high school and gotten their master's.
Yep.
Um, so so yeah, with my question on this with the visuals, Ben, was I imagine here's the script, and then you're going through it and you're going, okay, we've got portrait here, we need a map here, we need B-roll for this, we need
Yeah, it's
We
B-roll,
not
don't do
B-roll,
it that
really
B-roll.
way.
like that.
Inter
We don't storyboard it that way. It's a very fluid process.
It's more like, here's our scene. Okay, what do we have to show for that? Okay, we shot at this place, we shot at that place. We've got these still images from 1775. We got these from 1875. Um, here's some documents that might work. Go ahead and have fun, editor. Editor
so
puts it out there. We review it, and maybe we have some ideas after that. But really, it starts with them.
And
I
we also,
asked,
yeah,
go
sorry.
ahead. No,
No,
I'm sorry.
we don't do our interviews with the script either. We're
Right.
never asking you to get us from A to B. We go and
Oh,
just take Chris Brown's class on the American Revolution for 3 hours.
Yeah,
We're not idiots. We do a lot of prep for those interviews, and we think about what he might have to say and what he's written. You're gonna ask him to sit down. We're gonna do some homework and be respectful, but we don't go with a script.
right.
We just want it to be a conversation.
Have
no,
you
you
ever
could.
had to call Chris Brown, who's amazing, or Kathleen Duvall, or Stacy Schiff, or any of the amazing,
Rick, yeah.
incredible, laundry list of great historians, and say, we need to come back. We need to do one more session.
Sometimes.
In the 30 years I've worked with Ken, we've done that less than I can count on one hand.
Okay.
But it's usually just because we loved this interview so much and we ran out of time. So
Right. It's
when we
never
do
to
that,
correct anything.
we painstakingly map the room to make sure that we can reproduce the same shot. We say, hey, don't lose that shirt. Because we want to make it, feel the same. That is really rare.
Yeah.
It has happened, but it didn't happen on this film.
This way of approaching the interviews is not the standard format.
You asked earlier, what's the first thing you do when you're making this film? And we said we read and read and read. But actually, even before that, is to just accept that you just throw what you know out the door and be humble and understand that whomever you're going to talk to can tell you something that could make this movie better. And so you'd also do that when you go in on the interviews. Sarah and I work to write the questions, but Sarah is always the one in the chair asking the questions, and we are not leading with them. We may ask a follow up that takes us somewhere from one thing to another, but it's not in any way take us from point A to B in the script.
We're always listening. I mean, I think that's the thing in all the years of watching and listening and getting to know the people we interview and interviewing them is that everything fades away and you just want to be curious about what they know. These are some of the leading scholars, writers, thinkers of our time. I mean, Rick Atkinson, just take a minute for him, right? The great military historian, but writer, journalist, generous friend, thoughtful person that he is. That's the longest interview we did. And the
Raise your
first,
hand. Oh, I'm sorry, Sarah.
yeah,
Raise
We're
your hand
also
if you ordered a Rick Atkinson book while you were watching this series.
Yep.
like really?
Started listening to his World War II trilogy just recently.
Yeah, I mean, we've been joking because none of us had met Rick before working on the American Revolution, but we've been leapfrogging each other on different wars, right? He's written a lot about World War II. He wrote a seminally important book on called The Thin Gray Line about West Point and in Vietnam. One of the families we follow was inspired from that book, the Harrisons. He's an extraordinary person and incredibly generous. And that interview was literally just take us through, how do we think about this? Why does the war matter? How does it matter? Tell us about George III. Why should we care about the American Revolution? And he's the first talking head in the film and the last talking head in the film. And the first question we asked him is his first answer, and his last answer is the last question. And that has never happened in all the years of filmmaking.
That's
So shout out to
incredible.
Rick.
I wonder for you guys how, you know, David, we had you want to talk about Benjamin Franklin. And it's, when you're making a film where the protagonist's name is the title, you have a pretty clear person you're going to follow to tell the story, right? Because the story is about the person. The American Revolution, I mean, it's incredibly complex, but just from a conceptual level, you're telling the story of an event. And yet throughout it, we find ourselves anchored to a few key figures. Washington, Benedict Arnold, interestingly enough, is a reoccurring person. Nathaniel Greene. And these are a lot of the story hinges on them. And I, by the way, this is not an endorsement. I fully endorse the Washington thing. Even when Chris Brown says, you can tell Chris Brown is like reluctant and he's like, I hate saying things like this.
Yeah.
But if you don't have Washington, it doesn't happen. But at the same time, and I suspect you've gotten this question before, you know, Hamilton's basically absent from it.
Sure.
Burr is absent from the film. I mean, they make a couple of flashes in.
References,
Even
right.
Lafayette has kind of a smaller role, whereas these folks you've talked about here, they get center stage. How did you make that decision? Especially when you've gotten this question before, why isn't Hamilton in it? You've got to get that question like every
Well,
other
I
day
mean,
from people because of the musical and they know him.
I think some people might ask that question. I think Hamilton's story during the Revolution, it's his real impact on American history
After.
comes after. So I don't think it was so intentional to. It's not, and we didn't leave him out. He's there, but to not focus on him. And also, he was with Washington so much that, you know, it's possible that some of the words you're hearing Washington say were things that Washington dictated to Hamilton's pen,
Yeah.
right? Since he was his aide de camp for so long. Burr, another person that we can name drop, but he's not world important at the moment. You can't not tell the story of the American Revolution without George Washington.
Yeah.
That's if anything is self-evident about the American Revolution, I think it should be that. And Nathaniel Greene too, and Benedict Arnold too. But in like what we were able to do, I think, and you didn't ask about this, but I'm going to go there anyway, is to follow some of the, you know, really unknown characters. Joseph Plum Martin, who was just basically everywhere during the war. John Greenwood, who was everywhere else. And Betsy Ambler, who, you know, is somebody that we surfaced who hadn't been in many of these stories of the American Revolution, in part because she never saw a battle. But she's from Yorktown, Virginia. She lived much of the war as a refugee, and she was impacted by this war and is a great example of a civilian impacted by this war in ways that we don't normally consider. Plus, she was a really great writer. And we're grateful that they, you know, committed their history, their truth to history, and that we get to, through the work of some incredible actors, bring those experiences to life in this film.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that. The average people, right? When we talk about the, you know, when I saw you in Raleigh for the when Ken came to Raleigh to kind of premiere this, Ken said something. He said, and I'm going to paraphrase it because I can't say it as well as he said it. Um, in Ecclesiastes, it
Mm,
says, "There's nothing new under the sun."
right.
Hmm.
But the
He,
American Revolution.
Ken said that was true for all time except for one moment, and that's the American Revolution.
Yeah.
Yeah,
We
and I
went
think
from
yeah,
subject to citizen.
right. And it is a world-changing event. At the same time, there's a lot within the story of the American Revolution that confirms Ecclesiastes too, right? There's a lot of things that you'll see in the American Revolution that you might see in the Vietnam War or the Civil War, or for that matter, any other moment in American history. War refugees, like I was just referring to Betsy Ambler. Who thinks of the American Revolution as a story of refugees? And it really, really is. Um, from those patriot refugees that left Boston
Boston, right?
in 1775 to people on the frontier who have to be to Native people who have to move farther west or into Canada, and especially I would say to the American loyalists who had to give up their country or who chose to give up their country when it became something that they had fought against. So I don't know. There is nothing new under the sun is a good point. I don't know why I went elsewhere with this. Yes, it is a world-changing event. Uh, citizens, citizenship. Sarah can speak to how important it is that we are citizens in this new country, that the most important office in the land is that of citizen, and that the founders
Really cared about that.
really cared about that.
That is why it is so powerful, the voices of the common person that are throughout this series. That's what makes this the idea that unlike other documentaries, and of course, like we just went through this for a while here about how pivotal Washington is, and we hear the voices of Franklin and Washington and Arnold and on and on. But we hear the voice was equally as loud, if not louder, of the average citizen. There is no average citizen, of the citizen. Period. Man, woman, black, white, Native American. Just
British,
the
German,
British,
French.
German,
Yeah.
French, the
This,
Yeah.
Hessian soldiers, like
right.
Yeah.
it just on and on and on.
This is America. This is the reason to be patriotic. This is who we are. We have done incredibly well over 250 years when you really peel back the layer and think about it as ironic, complicated, difficult, and sometimes ugly our history is. As Maggie Blackhawk says, we have pushed the levers of power to make those founding ideals real. In 250 years, we've done okay. And as Annette Gordon-Reed says at the end of the film, the founders wanted us to be engaged. They wanted an active citizenry. Education was enormously important to every single one of the founders. They debated themselves how this should all go. They were not a monolith. They were a group of really smart, deep thinking people who wanted to do something new and wanted to do it well. And there's many unintended consequences. I mean, John Adams would be, what he worried about happened, and we're lucky and we're glad for that. But I think we hope that the film ultimately inspires people to be patriotic in some of the ways that the founders hoped we would be patriots and wanted us to be, and that we will be involved in our communities, neighbor to neighbor, state to state, federal to federal, and not just wake up every 4 years and care, and not wake up every 2 years and care, but care all the time.
What are the challenges now that it is completed? It is being revealed to the world. What are the challenges of promoting something that is so vast and demands mental, like the viewer is a participant in something like this. You don't, it's like reading a novel. You don't passively read a novel or watch a extensive documentary like this. But we are living in the age of the soundbite
Mm-hmm.
and even shorter. Like
Yeah.
we live in the age of the clip. So
It's
what are some of
really
the
challenging. It's
so
really
yeah, what
challenging, particularly to talk about it, because we spent years trying to um, honing a 12-hour thing, right? And we think that the 12 hours speaks, says all we want to say. But you can't just sell 12 hours with, here, just go watch it. You have to give people a little bit here and there to pique their interest. But when you do that, there's just always another layer behind what I want to say. And I think that's possibly why some of these answers I'm rambling, because there's just more and more and more to that story. I would encourage people to watch this. I think it will, obviously that would be good for me if you watch it, but I think it will really tell you something, teach you something that makes your country make more sense than it did before you watched it. And I also would encourage you to please put the phone down while you watch it, because this is a visual medium, as well as an audio medium. And you are going to see some really beautiful cinematography, but also some really beautiful art created in the period or since. These maps we've been talking about are unbelievable, and they'll really get you to begin to understand this country in a whole new way.
I don't think you really can appreciate what we're trying to do with the film without the 12 hours. And part of me hopes that because we live in an age of TikTok and short attention spans and little memes and videos, that something that asks you to just sit down and binge for 12 hours and really pay attention, because you can't, it's dense, right? It's not passive watching, it's active watching. And I hope maybe the fact that it's so the opposite of everything that we do will inspire people to do it. And I don't think you can have a real opinion about the film unless you give it your full attention for 12 hours. And we're conscious of the fact that we're asking you to do that. And we're really grateful to the people who do.
Let me just make a sale here. You live in a country where we're constantly debating these things, and this pivotal moment in our history is everywhere. It's being evoked by politicians. It's being sold to you in commercials. It is at least some part of almost every American's sense of themselves. And what you're being asked is to spend 12 hours of your life trying to grapple with this. It seems like a small price to pay, especially when you consider that sometimes people would leave to go home from these camps and they would walk for weeks just to get home, and then they would come back. And the sacrifice that you are asked to make to honor those people is to spend a little bit of your time. And don't just stop here with this documentary. Hopefully this will get you started off with it. But that's your sacrifice. And I want you to compare the two. And I wonder, when I asked you this question earlier while we're having the conversation, this occurred to me. I asked you, like, the question here is who's the protagonist, right? And you have a topic. There was a great conversation between Stephen Levitt and Yuval Noah Harari, and which Levitt said to Harari that he broke Stephen Dubner's rules of storytelling, which is you always have to have a protagonist. And Yuval Noah Harari's response to that was, the protagonist is the reader. This is their story. So yes, I'm writing about a concept, but it's your story. And I think that maybe if you watch this documentary with that in mind, that this is your story, you're learning about who you are.
Beautiful thing to say. Yeah.
That's
I was going to say that's a beautiful thing to say. I don't know. Protagonist is our country and we're responsible for it.
Mm-hmm.
Good, bad, and ugly.
Yeah.
Good, bad, and the ugly.
Does
anyone else have anything? Does anybody have anything else to say before we wrap?
Thank you for your attention.
Thank you.
To this matter.
To everything.
Okay, I love you all. Have a great day.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Bob.
All right, bye.
Thank you for listening to The Road to Now. If you enjoyed this episode, please tell the world by giving us 5 stars and a review on Apple Podcasts or 5 stars on Spotify. Or spread the word directly. Just text a friend maybe, or share a link on social media. Anything helps and we appreciate it. And if you've got a friend who hasn't gotten into podcasts yet, let them know they can hear us every weekend on SiriusXM's POTUS channel 124. Now is the time when we say our special thanks to our supporters on Patreon and give a shout out to our Washingtonians. That list is Tanya Marsh, Mary Hawking, Tim and Caitlin Wells, Fig White, Matt Williams, Team Martin, Ann Williams and Frank Edwards, Nate Farrer, Jennifer and Magnolia, Chris and Teresa Adams, Joy Avery, Edward Carlson, and Aaron and Derek Garrison. Thanks to all you guys for supporting us. If you want to support our work and maybe get on that list, you can join us on Patreon at patreon.com/theroadtonow. You'll get extended versions of select conversations, extra episodes, bonus materials, and more. That's all available at patreon.com/theroadtonow. For more on the show, visit our website, theroadtonow.com, where you can easily search our back catalog and quickly find links to content. Why is it so good? 7 Ages Design. That's who made it. If you're looking for a website, go check them out. The Road to Now is hosted and produced by Bob Crawford and me, Ben Sawyer. Our associate producer is Gary Fletcher. This episode was edited by Ben Sawyer, and our theme music, like pretty much always, was by Paul DeFiglia. For Bob Crawford, this is Ben Sawyer. Thank you for listening. Take care.